Well, again, I have the opportunity to be with you by this usual means to Dubna University and to my Professor Bolshakov, and we have many things to think about at this time. We have presently are entering into worldwide the worst threat of war that mankind has ever experienced, at least in known history. We are headed for, of all things, a thermonuclear war launched by the British forces, which have pretty much have control for the moment of the United States, who have control over much of Western and Central Europe, which is now in one of the greatest crises of all modern Europe. A breakdown crisis, a hyperinflationary breakdown crisis worse than that in Germany in 1923. Everything is headed toward disaster. Inside the United States, disaster. Inside South and Central America, disaster. Africa continues to be, has a death rattle, as a slave continent. We have the greatest threat, an immediate threat of thermonuclear war. And the leading issues are the economic issues, physical economic issues in particular, and the danger of thermonuclear war. Now, thermonuclear war cannot be fought because under the conditions in which the United States and continental Europe, the Euro part of that, Europe, on the one side, and on the other side, Russia, China, and other countries. If the war occurs, and it's threatening to reach that point now, within the coming weeks even, and not later than before the very beginning of next year, the threat is there will be a thermonuclear war. And a thermonuclear war is not like any other war, not even like a war with nuclear weapons included. A thermonuclear war is a war of extermination. What happens is, for example, the great submarines of the United States on the one side is typifying this, and when the United States has the greatest capability in that degree in all the transatlantic region and beyond. And so those great ominous submarines, thermonuclear submarines really, would launch the war from the present stage of destabilization and warfare in local regions. And immediately, other powers opposing that, such as Russia and China, would respond immediately with a similar launch. The capability of fighting this war with these kinds of weapons would probably be two general barrages, which would be the major part of thermonuclear barrages. And all you have to do is look back at the old Khrushchev bomb, the super bomb of that decade. And you look at what happened when the experimental bomb was blown up by Khrushchev and company. And you remember the images, some of you, the images of what the sky was like over Siberia in that particular period. It was a very dark time. But that was only one bomb. It was a very crude structure, which was really a nuclear weapon, but with the thermonuclear implications. This is not going to be like that if it happens. This will be an extermination kind of war. And the intent will be to try to exterminate the opponents. It will not be a war that can be fought. It can't be fought, because once this stuff is launched, and it can all be launched within an hour and a half, the greatest part of the destruction. And so therefore, that we live in a circumstance in which the issue of preventing that from happening is now the central feature of the prospects of mankind. There's been nothing like this in history. Finally, mankind has developed a weapon on a large scale which can actually extinguish the existence of the human species, or nearly do so. And that thing could happen quite realistically. It could go off in the remainder of this year, or at the latest, the very beginning of next year. So far, this war has been in preparation for more than a year now. But some people, such as the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States, Russia, and others, have been taking measures to cause a postponement of what would have been the intention of the British monarchy and of the President Obama of the United States, who are the actual instigators of this war. They've been stymied by the intervention of people, military people and others in the United States and other countries who have recognized this danger and recognize that we have to prevent this from happening. On the other side, presuming that we do what we have to do in order to prevent this war from ever actually occurring, the war is already could ignite this. But in that case, we face another problem. We face a food problem globally. We faced economic problems which are relatively worse as threats to mankind than anything in recent centuries. And we're going to have to not only build up our economy or rebuild it, as we're trying to do in Russia now, but we're going to have to rebuild the world economy. We're going to have to build it on a new phase. Now, the new phase is, in a sense, is here. Presuming that we do not get into a thermonuclear war, the future of mankind will be dominated by an effort to protect Earth from being bombed virtually by asteroids, large objects in space. We know that there are many out there. We have very little knowledge of the identity of the most of those things. We have only a tiny fraction of these asteroids which we can identify presently. We have almost no capability yet of doing more than modest gestures of defense against a serious damage to the population of Earth and to Earth itself, and even possibly later on the line, even the extinction of mankind, as the extinction of living processes has occurred on the planet Earth at earlier times in Earth's history. So the great battle, the great war, the legitimate war, the necessary war that we're going to have to fight is going to be a war which saves and protects mankind's existence on the frontiers of Mars and between Mars orbit and Earth orbit. That will be a central feature of any sane government, any sane planet which comes safely out of the threat of thermonuclear war now. We've been on this as scientists, we've been on this actually since the end of the 1970s and the beginning of the 1980s, where the defense of Earth against satellites and various kinds of things was in progress. We've now, with the landing of this instrument on Mars, we have the beginning of a buildup of the kind of equipment on Mars which can interact reciprocally with observers on Earth, and we can, at the speed of light, therefore, be an exchange of operations between Mars and Earth, which will help us greatly to interfere with the threats from satellites in the volume of space in between the Mars orbit and the Earth orbit. All of this suggests that we are going to get out of the kind of sloppiness that we had had in terms of the progress of science throughout the world. Science will have to take a great leap forward, that the postponement of science and the use of bad methods of economy, which stand in the way of science. In the United States has become collapsed. We have collapsed our productive capability. We have mass starvation in the United States, not only because of the bad policies of the current president and his predecessor, but because of natural conditions. We have moved our production, as into China, into poorer parts of the world where people are paid very little. We have in the United States, as happened in Russia, and has happened throughout most of Western and Central Europe. The ability to produce has been destroyed by the trends in policy over these recent, since the end of the 1980s, but actually earlier. So we're in a period where we have two essential visions. One is we have a horrible condition of economy in most of the planet for humanity as a whole. The death rate of humanity is now going to increase on the basis of the current trends, even without a thermonuclear war. We're going to have to reverse the trends in policy throughout Eurasia and the Americas to change the current policy, to go to high technology, to go to more emphasis on thermonuclear power as a power source, of high technology power source, which enables us to do the things we have to do and that we can do. So we've entered into a terrible period, but also a very promising period, if we allow ourselves to recognize what fools we have been over so many decades so far. Now we face a great danger, a danger of virtual extinction of nations, a possible extinction of humanity itself through thermonuclear war. We have a world which cannot feed its population anymore under these conditions. Death is crawling like a wave throughout the planet. And therefore, at times like this, rather than complaining and worrying, which don't do any good, we have to come to a time where we reenact and revitalize science. We need a global science driver program to go into areas of development which are available to us, but which have not been used, which have not been promoted. We're going to have to go to degrees of technology we've never undertaken before. And that's our option. We have on the one side the worst possible threat, the worst possible possibility. On the other side, we have the challenge, and especially to younger people, younger scientists, who will respond successfully to the alternative, to the mobilization of mankind, away from all the nonsense that we've wasted our lives upon in so many ways. And we're going to have to science driver programs which take over not only the development of Earth as such, the Earth territory. We're going to reopen the question of the moon as a place for building up the capability for going to Mars or sustaining Mars. We're going to be going to higher powers, thermonuclear fusion, controlled thermonuclear fusion, which can get us to from Earth or the moon to Mars within approximately a week. It'll maybe take a generation for us to achieve that kind of performance, but in the meantime we can be going in that direction. And therefore we have, I think, two things to consider. One, the threat of disaster, led by the threat of a thermonuclear war, which is now likely to occur unless prevented by almost miraculous means during the rest of this year into the beginning of next. And the push on this is the fact that the economies of Europe, for example, the economies of the Americas, especially North America, are collapsing at a rate which is unimaginable in previous times. So we're going to have to change those policies. We're going to have to reach up. The green policy will not survive, or else mankind will not survive. A green policy is impossible. Mankind cannot continue to exist successfully under a so-called green policy. High technology, high energy flux density, and very, very advanced physics. these are the things that are going to be required if the world is going to make it. And people who are young people in universities who are concerned with science are the actual leaders of the future in making possible what is so desperately necessary. Thank you.